Thank you so much for joining, guys. Just to give a quick recap of yesterday's roadmap presentation. So we have gone over the first 40 worker items yesterday in a brief, and then today we would be actually going for the next 44. And at the end of this, we would also be sharing the Excel sheet for having you adding the priorities for each of the worker items. That would be open for a week or 10 days, just to make sure that we have everybody's priorities. And once that is done, we will be starting our plan for the next 6 months roadmap, which would start from August and end in January end. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So today what we would do is we would actually give Gautam an opportunity, because there are few worker items which was created by him, and he is here with us today. So I would give him an opportunity to just discuss his tickets, and then so that you guys can understand and give some priorities for these tickets. So I would pass it to Gautam to go over this. Over to you, Gautam.
Hello, everyone. So this particular ticket we have, I think we discussed a similar one yesterday, but it had a very specific set of item there. I've mentioned that in the same ticket, but this particular ticket can also be divided into multiple sub-tickets, because all of these improvements that I believe will need to be thought through properly, architecture-wise or anyway. So let me go through each of them as per my experience. Oh, first one is supporting a table input of some sort, or the CSV import when you're entering any sort of values, right? A lot of these methodologies in the carbon world, at least, they require inputting 100 years worth of data, or let's say even a single field for, let's say, 100 times or 40 times, depending on the project creating period and what data you're looking at. Now, if you were to do it manually, tab by tab, it is not very easy to visualize for anyone, and it's very error prone as well to enter something like that way. And usually the market participants, they are very familiar in a CSV format, so they usually have this data already in some sort of CSV or a table format. And it'll be good to have some sort of a copy paste mechanism or file upload mechanism, or even the manual entry of a tabular input. And at the same time, once we do that, we would also need to figure out how to read that particular field into calculations or in the code. I believe would be a very useful thing for at least the carbon methodologies. So this was the first one. The second one we have is attachments to a field. Prerna, can you go back? There are 4 sub items there in the last itself. Yeah. So often, I think this was similar to the issue 2076, like Andrey might have discussed yesterday. So again, PVB or a standard registry usually asks for a justification or a report for why are you entering this field in a particular way, or why is that value. So the justification is, again, it's coming from some sort of external data provider or DMRV provider, right? Why exactly you choose this value to be like that. And that justification needs to be there corresponding to every field. So it will be useful to have some sort of file upload or even a text field there, which will make life a lot easier for submitting such fields. Then the third one is large documents, for example, PDD. Usually PDDs, they consist of 50 plus different sections. Every single PDD, if you see, they are 100, close to 100, and more than 100 pages long. Now, if you're talking about entering 100 plus sections in a form UI, that is pretty much impossible for a human to do properly. There'll be a lot of issues. And today Guardian doesn't support draft forms. So it's not possible for anyone to enter 50 plus fields in one go. So we need to have like a draft, save as draft form option on Guardian. And again, like I think we do have a feature of navigation based UI where you can divide it into sections and you can keep going on filling those sections. But at the same time, it becomes difficult for the policy developer to test, because every time they do a dry run, they have to press, let's say, 20 times to navigate each section to fill it with test values. So if you're a developer, we need to figure out how we can autofill all of those sections at once instead of one by one. So that'll be a useful thing to have. Again, like all of these can become like a sub feature requests in itself. So it'll be good to have maybe separate tickets for all of them because the architecture will anyway be very different. Then the fourth one, I think Ansel from Allcode will also talk about it in a bit, but shapefiles, so GeoJSON, these are usually large files like 7 MB, 16 MBs or more. And we need a way to upload those files on Guardian and also figure out a way to render it properly in the maps format, both probably in the indexer and once the form is submitted. So it's easier to view those. Okay. Ansel, do you want to take this one from Allcode side?
Basically, this comes directly from Alcott, which is like payment to a third party involved in the supply of data as part of the methodology. Now, at Alcott specifically, we're currently implementing a third party data source integration, but we do not have the ability to include the payments for this integration, basically. The idea here is that because we have, let's say we have a wallet, but this is like a specific wallet for each account. But what we want is that basically every tenant project developer that comes to us has this specific Hedera wallet that they can use to distribute like multiple third-party wallets. For example, some of that money goes to the community, some of that money goes to service providers, some of that money goes to the government, et cetera, et cetera. And we do not have that option yet. So I feel like this is really important for cui bono, for full transparency and for full community benefits, basically. So when these carbon credits are minted, we need to know and to put the money where it belongs, basically. So this is on this topic. I hope I was clear about that. Another one. So this usually comes to like project account wallet, which basically every project developer needs to have his own wallet because we do not have the option to implement sub wallets yet again to maintain like one wallet per specific project. And this is something that we also discussed before, but on the side with the Guardian team, the MGS side as well. For example, let's say for ABC Mangrove, we may have a main wallet, but for ABC Mangrove, we need to have a sub wallet that handles transactions specifically on that for various reasons. For example, like dispersing to the community or dispersing to service providers or dispersing to the government, depending on specifications of the. I think that's two on our side, non-development parts.
This one. So this is from the perspective of a policy developer, right? For those who are familiar with programming in general, they would understand the concept of unit tests, right? Now, if I were to change, let's say, speaking from again like carbon methodologies point where you have to take multiple roles of a VVB or an administrator and test certain things, right? So if let's say I had a small bug in the code of producing monitoring report, right? I have to start from scratch all the time to create new users, take up those different roles, fill out the policy, the project data once again, get it validated and everything. As a policy developer, I spend close to 50-60% of the time precisely doing that. And usually this is like once you modify something in a small subflow, let's say in a VVB section or in a project developer section, I have to run the entire policy from start, even if it's a minor thing. So this wastes a lot of time. I'd really appreciate if there was a way to test these subflows specifically. This is like unit testing in general, right? So you don't have to run the entire integration test suite. Just make sure that unit runs perfectly. Yeah, Andrey.
Yeah, this used to be the case. There is a maybe mitigation. I don't know. Obviously, the problem is understood and it definitely is present. And we have implemented recently save points in dry run. So you could point somewhere, and next time you start from that save point rather than from the beginning, it addresses in some way this and maybe the one of the previous tickets as well. But they're still valid. I just wanted to point out that maybe you can immediately use that feature, but they're still valid because yes, unit test concept would be great. And if you could enter a particular sort of entry point in the policy and execute a predefined sort of chunk of the policy with defined inputs and outputs and maybe do it repeatedly, it would still be an enhancement, a very valuable enhancement to the development process there.
A follow-up question on the save point feature. Does it work even if I edit the policy and re-trigger the dry run? And will it start from the same point as the
Yes.
previous?
Yes.
Is it? Okay. That should certainly cut down the time for testing. Definitely. Thanks. I'll look into it.
All right, I think these were the 4 items which we had. Thank you, Ansel. Thank you, Gautam, for contributing. Really appreciate it. And we'll definitely get the feedback from the community for the priorities, and then we'll make this a priority if we get a high priority from the community. Thank you so much. All right, so I would pass it to Andrey there, but just wanted to check if we have any Zeptagon community member over here, because this was raised by Zeptagon, I think yesterday. But thank you so much if you have, if any of your team over here is there. But I would pass it to Andrey. Oh yeah, we do have.
Yeah. So the requirement here is, so we are working on building our own carbon registry like a NCR. So we have specific requirements regarding the UI. So instead of using Guardian UI, we have built our own UI with more details, more information which support credit transfer that does not include in Guardian. And so for that, when we are building the UI, currently we are working on a specific carbon policy, but we should be able to add new policies that in Guardian dynamically. So for that purpose, so here right now what we have to do is we have to go through the policy and we have to know the policy and then build the front end based on that. So instead of that, if we can have some kind of SDK or UI. So currently Guardian UI is dynamic and it's populating based on the configurations that you gave on the policy. So if we can have that generation engine as a SDK that we can use to build our own dynamic UIs, so that will be very helpful for do custom UI apart from the Guardian UI. And we can use Guardian as a backend. So this is the main requirement that we had. And we will replace this issue. Actually, there are some issues, meaning is not there. So we will replace this issue. But this is the main requirement that we had.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Just to clarify, Guardian is designed with that in mind. So you can now, as it stands, build your own UI against Guardian. You don't have to run the UI that Guardian gives, even though it's a mono repo. You build, it'll build it. If you use the tooling that's in the GitHub currently, it will build the UI and the backend, but you don't have to run the UI and the backend. You could just run the backend, which provides the API and your UI. In fact, we've got deployments like this. Different UI runs against the same sort of backend. So that's okay. The other a little caveat here is that some of those things that are described here, they're not AI specific. For example, changes in the workflow, access control. In fact, that has to happen in the back end. The UI just would expose this functionality to the user, meaning like not show the options that are not available, maybe, and so on. But the enforcement would still would have to happen at the back end. So it would require some changes in the back end to implement a different sort of access control model. Yeah. So I guess we would, as you say, it needs to be expanded, maybe split into different tickets, because if we're talking about the access control, it's in the implementation. If we're talking about like some other stuff, it also may need a separate ticket. Just saying that as it stands, it's possible. It may be more convenient to do if UI was in a separate repository, like front end and a back end, rather than mono repo, but it's doable now.
Yeah,
as well.
So being a mono repo is not an issue. Actually, currently we are also using like that. So we have a backend and we don't use the UI. So that's not an issue from our side. The only concern is like, so we don't know what's currently you render so you have a set of policies, and when we want to dynamically support that policy, we don't know the relations between the blocks. For an example, now when we click this button, there is an approval process. So when we need to render the policy dynamically, we don't know that knowledge. So right now, one option is take in the policy and check the JSON file and understand the flow, the relationship of the flow. So if you want to render the UI dynamically, but can have like right now Guardian UI, you use some kind of like dynamic rendering part with some knowledge. So if we can use that knowledge to build our own UI, like we can separate that part, not the back end and the front end, but it's like you have some kind of the model and view part, separation of that part.
Oh, you mean, so you don't actually mean what it says is not front end to back end. What
Yeah,
you'd want is the module that dynamically renders forms and a policy workflow based on schema definitions and a policy definition. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like then we know what should be render, and then we can build our own dynamic UI on our side instead of hard code in the full workflow on our side.
Okay, now that I suppose the requirement is clarified,
Yeah.
It's in the code, obviously, but what you'd like to do is take it as a module rather than just a piece of code and import it into your thing. And yeah, product. Anyway, we need to rewrite that. Was that you who wrote this ticket? Then
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my colleague wrote it. We will rephrase it and update the issue. So sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Belinda. All right. So over to you, Andrey. As we are just having 30 minutes, Andrey, I think we have to just give a brief on the tickets because we have 40 items here.
Okay.
Yeah. Over to you.
I'll do my best to be quick. So this ticket is about introducing the capabilities that all other sort of blockchain assets have, NFTs in particular. It's got a wonderful opportunity for us to control, or not for us, for the issuers to control the life cycles of the assets. And one of those aspects of the life cycle could be how basically the asset changes hands. If it's sold to somebody and resold, maybe a part of the revenue, a royalty on that event can be paid to the original creator of the asset. So it's not about enforcing it, or it's introducing a capability into Guardian to enable asset issuers to specify these constraints. Whether they would choose to do so or not, it's their option, their choice. Next slide, please, Bruno. That's a ticket that is dedicated to enhancing policy authoring experience. At the moment, when blocks in the policy are configured, it's basically like a form which you go through the options and select this and that and that. And sometimes it can get very complex, and interdependencies between different values and different choices may not be as obvious. It probably would be easier for at least maybe lesser experienced policy authors to guide them through a step-by-step wizard-like creation process, configuration specification process for the blocks. Next slide, please. This requirement has been aired by the community maybe some time ago. The idea is to implement assurances, to introduce some form of signatures or assurances to the process of importing and exporting policies or modules. So it's basically to be able to, once assets or documents are issued by a Guardian instance, to certify that the policy, the methodology, the workflow under which these documents or assets have been issued is exactly the same as it was specified by the original policy creator, that the policy hasn't been changed at all, and therefore the workflow has been followed, or part of the policy, for example, a module that somebody's developed where the calculations happened or some other things. And that way you would know exactly that this particular item is valid in a broader sense of the word. Next slide, please. Yes, it's again enhancement to the experience of policy, or to ease the life of policy authors. At the moment, Guardian implements this suggestion mechanisms for blocks. The suggestion mechanism uses prior policies that have been defined in the Guardian instance to see what other blocks usually follow this block and like it creates like a proposal for the policy author, which blocks may be useful behind, like underneath the block that is currently in the focus. We can enhance this in many ways, and now the AI is very popular. This also doesn't have to be this instance. It can go globally and see all the policies in the ecosystem, or a selection of policies in the ecosystem that maybe have a particular tag or something like that, and see what's there and how it's structured, and maybe suggest a better option. It's just much more powerful, intelligent mechanisms for suggesting blocks, structures, proposing structures to the policy and blocks that follow the current block. Next one, please, Prina. Yes, there's a collection of Guardian UI improvements, and I think the ticket that we considered earlier would be one maybe feed into this, or we can merge them together. I won't go into detail on each one of these enhancements, but there's obviously never-ending effort of making Guardian UI and generally UX better, and we're continuously collecting feedback from ourselves, even when we help you create policies and use Guardian, as well as our quality assurance engineers, but most importantly from the community. So thank you for that feedback. Next slide, please. Yes, so we currently have a set of notifications, a predefined set of notifications in Guardian, and their frequency and events upon which the notifications are fired and displayed to the user. It's predefined by us, basically. They implement best practices as we see it, but obviously in the context of particular organization and particular use case, there might be a different preference for each of them. And this ticket is about allowing any user, including the standard registry, to configure notifications, to personalize that configuration for that specific user or for the organization as a whole. Next slide, please. Yes, tools is a special concept in Guardian. Tools is it's a module, but untamperable. Tools appear in the policy as a reference rather than as a group of elements. And it's got a special way that Guardian deals with it. And because of this, tools they're not as prominent maybe in the rest of the Guardian ecosystem, where you look, for example, for searches. You would like to maybe use production tools in a dry run mode, which is test. If somebody published a production tool and you wanted untamperable, but you wanted to run it kind of within you on the testnet. So the various permutations that are required, they're edge cases, but they're valid. And this ticket is about enhancing that experience and making sure the tools are reflected in, for example, a trust chain and various documents properly. Next slide, please, Priyam. Yeah, so any organization that has a security policy, they usually have a policy with regard to key or passwords, lifecycle. And at the moment, it is possible in Guardian to change keys, but it's not as convenient as it could be. And this ticket is about changing the situation and making key rotation or periodic key rotation are much easier to execute in terms of UX and sort of commitment of time for administrators. Next slide, please. This topic kind of resonates with our earlier conversation, because that was our thinking how to make external UI developers' effort more convenient. The idea behind this is to create a Guardian UI elements library. At the moment, we rely on some lower level third-party components, UI components libraries, open source, of course, to build the interface in Guardian, but it would probably be easier for a third-party or external developers with the community to contribute features, including the UI features, if we had more high-level Guardian component library. So you could almost maybe drag and drop, no, but maybe it's just visually, I'm like mentally thinking about this, not necessarily drag and drop physically, but just reuse the components to define, I don't know, schema view, and there you go, components. So maybe originally we weren't thinking at the same level as the renderer component for schemas, for example, but it is the earlier ticket we discussed just now is very compatible with the ideas behind this ticket. So again, it's for your consideration about the priority and the importance of this capability. Next slide, please. Yes, a little bit more kind of lower level ticket, but it's been a request from the community, and our own engineers also feel that it could be useful for more technically minded users of Guardian to have a direct exposure to JSON definitions of various, for example, UI elements, schemas, and so on, rather than just using UI in every circumstances. In order to do that, we can also enhance the JSON definition, make it more standard compliant and maybe more understandable by the users. So this ticket is about having JSON schemas for block properties definition, which would then you could copy it, reuse it maybe, and share it with others easier than maybe taking screenshots of how you configure the block. And that's maybe one way of doing that now. So even the kind of the libraries of blocks, how they configured can be created then maybe internally within an organization to help multiple policy authors to share their knowledge. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we talked about a similar ticket earlier. We've had a ticket dedicated to the export of schema dependency diagram. We talked about introducing maybe a new enhancements, specific enhancements. This one is just improving and it's a bigger maybe project there. This project scope is a less wide. It's improving what we currently have with visual, like different formatting, colors, and so on, just to make it more human readable. So maybe a higher ROI, I don't know, maybe higher priority in terms of urgency, because it may be easier to implement and it has an immediate effect, but it's for you and the community to consider and advise us. Next slide, please, Priyam. Right. This is about almost think about assets like Moody and others, which issue credit ratings to organizations and countries and so on. This is in the old economy where shares and various other financial assets are considered a similar but obviously different context. Similar mechanisms can be easily created in the Guardian ecosystem with the tooling that already is there. We've got labels, we've got artifacts that are published, we've got the entire trust chain history that's available for everyone to view, but everyone might not want to actually go through that material with themselves and just analyze it. And it's just the ability to fold it all into trustworthy entities, but third parties, not related to Guardian, not related to the asset issues, to be able to express opinions and then creating others to create automatic tooling that would be able to take those opinions into consideration, whether they're pricing or doing various lifecycle actions on various tokens. I see Wes got hand up, so Wes, over to you, please.
So for those who are familiar with Silvera, B0, and others on the ratings for projects, as these projects are created in different standards, they generally are paying a copious amount of money to these parties for a black box rating of an A+ or a B+. They claim to move the price by 40+%. The opportunity here is, as Andrey mentioned, with labels and statistics pointing down to the methodologies, schemas, and subsequent data to make this an easier experience and to perform differentiation project by project, A versus A, B versus B. We already can do this based on the tools that exist, automatic to get to the single rating, but making that comparable across different parties so we can see an A versus a B or across different ratings would be an opportunity. Some of the ratings have come to be more open. B0 is still absolutely the very tight black box that it started as. And so these are the opportunities that we have to make it a little bit easier to compare.
Yeah. Thank you, Wes. Next slide, please, Prina. All right, this ticket is about the kind of the evolution of the earlier work that we've done to giving ability to revoke statements, which are usually in Guardian statements are expressed in terms of documents that are being published. Ability to revoke the documents and do a cascading revoke then of all the documents that depend on this document. So that work is done and that information is published, but what hasn't been decided yet and implemented is revoking tokens. There's quite a bit of rectifying tokens. If some tokens were issued on the basis of maybe some documents, statements that have since been revoked, but the tokens may have been passed on to different, like bought, sold, maybe even retired since, and then the revocation has happened. What do we do with basically the tokens that be issued? They need to be marked somehow, or there's some maybe an error correction, error tokens issued or something like that. So this ticket is about deciding what needs to be done and obviously implementing what we've decided or what you've decided needs to be done in this case. Next slide, please, Prina. As a trust chain is the core vision or core visualization of the provenance of all the data, and particularly provenance of all the data that leads to the creation of the asset. So if you've got a token, you could clearly see what has happened. You can navigate and examine the data that led to the creation of this token. And we've got many other tools around this. The statistics also give you a different view. Then you can see labels. You can see what others see in this. So it's all interconnected set of like information and various summaries, like statistics are effectively a summarization and some angle of that all information, because there's a lot of information, but it's all that information is available. And trust chain is a core kind of entry point into that world. What is currently missing is, or maybe not expressed as, it's not missing, but it's not expressed as well as it could be, is the changes in the policy itself under which these assets have been issued, because the assets can exist for a long time, maybe a decade or decades, and clearly the policies are not, while they're immutable, the actual policy, the methodology that's based on is evolving, and the policies are evolving as well. They've got new versions continuously, an ability to see which kind of group of assets corresponded or was issued under which policy, and how the evolution of the policy potentially affects those. It doesn't affect those assets is what this ticket is about. Next slide, please, Rita. So that's another revocation enhancement that we need to implement. We have implemented a concept of policy chaining, is where an execution of the policy, actually the others as well, quite is another area in Guardian, the decentralized execution of a policy across multiple Guardians. And we've recently implemented another sort of dimension to it, but this is a slightly older dimension, is where you can pass on the execution of the policy to another instance of the Guardian with a different kind of chunk of policies. It's not the same policy that's being executed, but it's one policy and then another policy, and the output of execution of the first policy kind of serves as an input to the execution of the second policy, and so on. And those policies can be run by different and issued and run by different organizations, completely different. Maybe time frames can be different. They can be preserved there for 6 months and then picked up by another policy, all that. But what's not been figured out completely yet is how do you revoke documents. Like we do have a revocation architecture for documents when it's executed in a single instance of the Guardian, but how do you pass on the revocations in the policy chain back to different organizations or forward to different organizations? The original one revoked something that was consumed by the other policy and something's been produced on that. So it also requires a coordination, multi-instance multi-policy coordination, and the stick is dedicated to that. Next slide, please. That is a fairly simple to define requirement. There's a standard NFT standard 412 in the hedera ecosystem, and Guardian assets, some of the Guardian assets are issued as NFTs, but they're not fully compatible with that standard. So this came from Matt originally, a requirement to make them compatible for all the other tooling around hedera ecosystem, not Guardian ecosystem, to work seamlessly and nicely with NFTs that's been issued by Guardian instances. Next slide, please, Priyam. This is another topic in the area of enhancing policy authors' user experience, really, and it is about pre-validating the correctness or the quality of the policy that's been defined by the policy author, even before it's executed. Just while it's being configured and edited, Guardian could offer some advice. We discussed a little earlier the advice that Guardian does in terms of what blocks might be suitable to add to the policy following a particular block that you've got in focus, because it looks at other policies that have similar structure. But here it can also add other meta information. Some elements have been deprecated, maybe have not been used frequently. That might be a useful information for the policy author, or sometimes because the kind of conceptual language that is used to define policy is quite complex and rich, like there's if then else statements, there are various branching, there are events. Sometimes it's possible to make kind of create a dead sort of branch of code, never being reached, but it's there and consumes mental space, if anything. So something like that. So yeah, there is a list of this, but just a few examples here for your consideration. Next slide, please. Thank you, Priyam. Yeah, at present, the evolution and data that's been collated by Guardian instance and issued as VCs and various other aspects of its statistics, labels, all of that is the information that's stored IPFS. It's in terms of the blockchain itself, it's off-chain. It's referenced on-chain, but the information itself is off-chain, and therefore for smart contracts, for example, it's not directly accessible. We are here, the goal of this ticket, and much design needs to happen on this, is to make that information accessible to smart contracts that are run by third parties or maybe Guardian itself for making decisions. And there's not, obviously we envision some of the decisions that could be made, for example, accepting tokens as a pay and retirement, or maybe buying and selling tokens, pricing decisions, and so on. But there are many other decisions about the lifecycle of the token. Once the tokens are on chain, the decisions are about the lifecycle of that token is also done on chain. But the information that's been assembled before the token issuance is off chain, and this is the bridge between those two worlds, at least about creating that bridge. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is an enhancement for the policy author, but not user experience, but just an ability to create more advanced policies. At the moment, the options for actions of the user when sort of question is presented are hard coded in there. And we could even consider this ticket as part of the earlier ticket for more complex workflows between users, where there's a response, a question, and so on. So I think we talked about that earlier. Moving on to the next ticket, please, Priya. So as there's a group of stakeholders that's working continuously on defining cross-industry, cross-implementation standard for the terminology for environmental-based assets, and we should make Guardian compatible with this. And at the moment we are partially compatible. So we need to continue doing this. And obviously this ticket is about continuation of that work, and it's up to you to prioritize how important it is versus all the other potential work items that we could do and discussed earlier. Next slide, Prina, please. This use case came from a consideration from the field, a specific use case for a very large number of potential MRVs. An ability to track that. We are talking about, as specified here, tens of billions, for example, RFID tags and their impact on the environment, because each one of them, let's say a shoe is produced somewhere in the factory, and RFID tag is placed into that shoe, and with the number of humans on the planet and the trainers that people wear, it's easily maybe in hundreds of millions or more, and we need to validate and enhance the entire tool chain that's used by Guardian. IPFS, obviously hedera can probably cope with this, but we've got IPFS, we've got the databases and general user interface as well in Guardian is not designed currently or hasn't been validated currently for the volumes that we're talking about here. So that's the work item is dedicated to supporting that kind of use case. Next slide, please, Prina. So we talked about an aspect of that yesterday. It's to do with hedera being reset, hedera testnet being reset and information is lost. We could approach this in various ways, and here this ticket is a broader scope than the ticket we discussed yesterday. It's about ability to recreate your entire setup as you had it before with your Guardian instance on the testnet once the hedera has been reset. And it's a little more complex, obviously, because some of the things that we use to reference items that are stored in IPFS are generated dynamically by hedera. And we record this in messages then, a transaction ID, for example. So it's quite a complex process to go through, rework all of this, and then navigate and change the data in messages and so on. So it's not just simple sort of restoring it, it's regenerating the entire history of operations or maybe selecting the parts of history that are relevant for you to bring into the new, freshly reset testnet. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, a little bit earlier we touched on one angle of this. This is a comprehensive sort of epic ticket, as at the moment, pretty much everything, not pretty much, but everything that happens to the data that's consumed by Guardian policies is defined by the policy. So the entire life cycle of data, the transformation of data, how it's published and in what context, and all of that is defined in the Guardian policy by those blocks and the events that flow between the blocks in the policy definition. However, when it comes to the assets that are issued as the result of the policy execution, only some aspects are dictated by the policy, and those aspects are basically a retirement of the token and only a subset of that. And it is defined by the policy and then expressed as a code in the contract that gets deployed by the Guardian instance on hedera. But it's just an aspect of the life cycle. There could be many more other things that could be enabled. I don't know, decaying value, maybe something of that sort, or maybe growth. The longer the token maybe is not passed or touched and stored in treasury, the more valuable it becomes, or some properties change, and all of that is implementable, it's doable. But Guardian policy definition language at the moment doesn't have the tools and it doesn't have also the connection to the hedera or smart contracts to define those properties of different token life cycles. So this ticket is about enabling policy authors to also expand the policy kind of effect further to the life cycle of the actual assets that have been issued on hedera, but controlled still by the policy in Guardian. So the next slide, please, Prina. So yes, I think we actually, one of the tickets we had very early in today was an aspect of this, the ability to attach a piece of information to a field. It's a similar idea that's behind this, but it's slightly different angle to it. So rather than attaching a file to a field or maybe providing a description, it's the ability to specify or modify the resulting document that's being produced by the block or a chain of blocks, manually changing its structure or expanding its structure to include something else directly into the document. Yes, that can be a reference to another document or a URL maybe, or some data point in whatever format that you require, including maybe GeoJSON and various other data and images potentially as well. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, so we had us. I think it's a duplicate. It's the duplicate somehow. We not just that. It's a duplicate of the cascading deletes that we discussed yesterday, Prina. So let's move to the next ticket. Right. Yes. This ticket is proposing that we will implement a self-custodian signing mechanism for Guardian policy execution. So at the moment, as we kind of designed Guardian with organizations in mind, there is still individual accountability for actions, but it's the kind of organizational responsibility to manage the keys that these actions and this accountability is based on for individuals. And it is possible to change this and make Guardian key management much more decentralized, make it an individual's responsibility for managing keys, or maybe some individuals can delegate it to some organizations, which are different organizations. That way, Guardian instance becomes more secure from a certain angle, because a single key or a single account being compromised would not lead to compromise of all the other accounts potentially. Now, because it's an organizational account that manages everything, if somehow that account gets compromised, it's probably less likely to be compromised because it's organization. Therefore, specialist expertise is applied to various procedures and technologies that are used to manage these keys. But if it gets compromised, then it gives the attacker exposure to all the other keys, and the attacker can choose to pretend to be different people. And so, yeah, that's the enhancement there. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes, and the previous ticket also mentioned Fireblocks. Guardian integrates with Fireblocks, but the integration is not full scope. Currently Fireblocks is used to sign messages going to hedera topics. However, there are other like secrets or certificates, signatures that are produced by Guardian in the course of policy execution, which are not currently using keys from Fireblocks. Over Wes, please.
Yep. On this one, very specifically, we've had great struggles with Fireblocks for 2 to 3 years on their delays in implementation and timeline. So this one I know has been on the roadmap for a long time for those who've been in the community. And they support what's called blind or raw signing, which has more risk, and we want to better cover that risk we've put a lot of restrictions on it to help box that risk in, but there will be some updates to the Fireblocks capabilities on hedera. And so please consider that when voting, because we may benefit from giving Fireblocks more time to mature, despite them taking their time on implementing accordingly.
Just a quick time check. I think we are at the end of the meeting. I'm happy to continue, but I wonder what community would prefer continue now, or maybe have another meeting, because we've not managed to complete the entire roadmap.
Personally, that we should probably continue because we're going to have this recorded anyway. So we're going to send it out for those that can't stay.
Sounds good. Next slide, please.
I think
Yes.
we're almost done anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this ticket is about introducing advanced role model into the in policy. So we talked earlier, I think yesterday it was, about the way Guardian permissions work at the moment for users. And that conversation was about the Guardian users roles. And one of the permissions that the Guardian users may have is access to the policy. And once they have that permission, then the further permissions of that user within the policy is defined by the policy permissions definition language. And it has some things that are quite advanced and not available maybe even for Guardian policy users permissions definition, because the nature of the permissions within policy and within Guardian as an instance is very different, but also maybe lacks certain power for complex use cases. So this ticket is about enhancing the capabilities of Guardian policy permissions tooling to define much more complex user use cases and relationship with the actions and access to data within the policy for users. Next slide, please, Pranam. So we have a policy diff, as we call it, policy comparison feature. And we also have in Guardian currently a policy search feature. So not only you can compare two policies side by side and see the differences, you could also find all policies as defined that have similar or the most similar structure to the policy that you're looking at. You say there's another policy out there somewhere where structure is similar. But when we say out there, we mean within the Guardian instance currently. And it works quite well, but it doesn't allow for the global ecosystem search of similar policies. We can search for data, and through the indexer, this search is specific for the actual policy structure. It's most likely it's going to be used by policy authors to find examples, maybe actually auditors to find other policies and find out how compatible the policy they're evaluating is with other policies that are considered to be standard or generally acceptable practices. Next slide, please, Pranam. Yes. So at the moment, we have hard-coded rules for rounding when tokens are minted. It's not always applicable for every use case, unfortunately, because some use cases require more precision and maybe being more conservative or more the opposite of conservative when tokens are minted. This ticket is about introducing capability into the Guardian policy authoring tooling to enable policy authors to specify advanced rules for rounding when tokens are minted. Next slide, please, Pranam. Yes, for data availability and various other accountability reasons, discontinued policies are still available for users to see and navigate through. But at the moment, it can be misleading if a user by accident maybe navigated to or just generally maybe slightly confused. So some other instances where they can be clicking on buttons and trying to execute actions which are not possible because a discontinued policy cannot be operated on, cannot be executed. What we could do is enhance, make sure users don't face errors and don't get confused about them, and prevent users from doing those actions by graying out buttons that allow them to do them. That's what this ticket is. Requirement is. Next slide, please, Pranam. Yes. Okay. So this ticket, as we have a library of Excel data and schema definitions and policies in the Guardian repo that allows policy authors to navigate and maybe take the things and reuse them in their policy definitions. But some of these are defined, particularly the Excel definitions, are more suitable for kind of a one profile of potential Guardian policy authors, more or less maybe technical, more kind of business side of things. But then from another perspective, we've got another group of policy authors that are more technical, more familiar with JSON and various tooling that allows you to define JSON nicely. This ticket is from the community and it suggests we introduce another data in another format, in JSON format, to cater for this group of Guardian users. Next slide, please, Priyam. Yes, as to control the life cycle of assets that are issued by Guardian, Guardian implements the possibility of deploying smart contracts on Hedera in Solidity, and these smart contracts don't have to be published by Guardian. They can be published externally, and also they don't have to be the contracts that have come with the Guardian distribution. You could introduce your own smart contracts. The smart contracts that come with Guardian are kind of an implementation, a suggested an implementation, but it can be expanded, enhanced, and changed to suit Guardian different instances of Guardian needs. What we are thinking about here is to improve those contracts that come with Guardian distribution to allow more efficient operation, really. There are various clever things that can be done with Solidity to, for example, minimize the cost of certain operations, or to introduce batch operations on larger volumes of data, NFTs, and so on. So that's what this ticket is about. It's not going to change the actual functionality as such. It's just going to change maybe some other properties, mostly cost or time of executing certain operations on chain on Hedera. Next slide, please. Yes. Yeah, there's integration with Miko wallet already existing in Guardian. It can be further enhanced to support a revocation of items like user credentials, data, and issued tokens. It's a different ticket to other revocation tickets that we talked about today, because it's specifically targeting the integration with Miko wallet, which is basically a partner that developed that, and we need coordination between two parties to make that happen. Next slide, please, Preenam. Yes, yes, that was from the report, right?
The audit issue.
Yeah, it's again, it's hardening Guardian distribution. Basically, the default configuration of the Guardian software distribution as it comes out at the moment. It may be deemed a little too lenient, and there's always a trade-off in security between user convenience and security, and most of the time if you increase security you affect user convenience, and here specifically we're talking about the timeouts of user logins, and if you like have some inactivity on a user, I don't know, if you're like most people like myself, I never shut down my computer. It's always hanging in there, all the sessions and so on. And they time out, you have to re-log in, and it's frustrating. And sometimes, so I, like as a user, I would prefer it to not time out. But obviously, as an IT professional, I understand that it's very insecure. And we had a third party evaluating Guardian code base and giving us advice on what may need to be changed, and that was one of their suggestions. So we definitely follow that. But the question is really how high of a priority it is for you, for the community. Where is your kind of risk tolerance there, and your preferences lie? Next slide, please, Rina. Yeah, that's another item from the reviews, which is multi-factor authentication. Maybe the concern for the Guardian open source team here is which tool would we use for authentication, the second factor of authentication, because some of them are open source, but maybe not as commonly used as some others. Google Authenticator, which is a proprietary implementation. So we would like an input from the community with regard to the priority of this ticket for you, but also what would you see as an acceptable tool for us to maybe implement first, and then maybe the priority of the others. Next slide, please, Prina. Yes. Yes, this is a particular enhancement, a very specific enhancement to our permissions and roles model. It's to do with the owner role. Yes, but it's specifically inside the smart contract. It's also reported by the auditors. We have, just to make sure to put it in the context, we've addressed all the critical and major, all the important things that the auditors have highlighted. These were the ones that are here, and that's why they're here, because they've been like a suggestion, maybe nice to have a low priority item that for your consideration, whether it needs to be done or not. This specific one is owner role in smart contracts. Is quite powerful. It allows you to like update contracts, change various things, and you could consider it goes two ways. If you can change an owner role, if something is compromised, then they change the owner role and then they control the smart contract. So from a certain point of view, you can argue in some use cases probably makes it less secure if you can change. But on the other hand, if you can't change, then compromised account leads to permanent compromise, also not good. So overall, the pros and cons need to be considered, but most importantly, we need to know how high of a priority list this item is for you. So next slide, please, Prina. Yeah, outdated Solidity version is another item on the agenda there. Solidity is the language that is used to define smart contracts that we deploy on Hedera, and outdated versions. There are two aspects of this. One, potentially outdated Solidity version may contain vulnerabilities and maybe it's less supported, but the risk, in my opinion, is quite low on this because it's not the Solidity version that matters quite as much as the actual implementation on chain and the conservative implementation of the smart contracts itself in the language. But the other thing that it has is maybe doesn't allow certain advanced operations and maybe certain enhancements in the smart contract that we could do with the newer Solidity version that we are unable to do now. But we can't do them before this is done, and upgrading is an effort, and hence it's here for your consideration. Next slide, please, Rina. This functionality has been requested from, I can't remember who requested it. I don't know if it says here, but there were multiple times that somebody mentioned this. The idea is to be able to enable users to transfer HBARs on Hedera from within the policy. So for example, if a user needs to transfer, like request verification from maybe some third party or something, and they need to pay for it, an ability to say a button pay is an option for us to implement in Guardian. There's another work ongoing, just to place it in the context for you. There's another work ongoing in Hedera ecosystem. I can't remember the HIP 199 or 119, I think, which we considered earlier. It's about, sorry, Brina, what was the number?
199.
199, that's right. Thank you. About having topics where if you need to post a message, not you, but a user posts a message into the topic would have to prepay, or the owner of the topic can charge for access to the topic. And we could integrate with this rather than having HBAR transfer block specifically for some of the use cases that are outlined here. But yeah, it's an option for us to implement both of these or one of these earlier than the other. And that's why it's here for your consideration. Next slide, please, Brina. Right. This is maybe an issue we should deal with, and we continuously update documentation and we welcome your notes for us if you find something that's maybe wrong or broken link or any other issue with the computation, please let us know. We almost always, when that happens, it's a question of maybe hours or maximum a day for us to update documentation to correct the errors. But because Guardian has been evolving for a while now, and the rate of its evolution is quite significantly, it's difficult to be certain about the validity of everything in the docs. And we try to review it for every release and validate it, but the volume is just so big that maybe we need, if we want to update all the workflows, maybe we need to have a dedicated kind of project to do that. And obviously this project requires some resourcing. So we need to know how important it is for you that we update all the walkthroughs into docs, please. Next slide, please, Priyam.
I think this was the end. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks. Over to you then, or over to everyone for any questions or comments.
So I would just open this if anybody have any questions on any of the topic. I know we are almost like 20 minutes ahead, but as Daniel said, that this is already recorded, we would just want to take some more time to see if anybody have any questions on this.
Just want to say thank you. I know there's a lot of tickets that we've just gone through. Thank you for everyone taking the time to listen. Thank you for the Envision team for putting this all together. As you can see, there are a lot of priorities in the community that we've collected for the past few years. Some have been prioritized, some have made it to the top of the list. Others are still out there, and it's up to everyone to vote. We try to help facilitate the conversation amongst the foundation, Hashgraph, the Envision team, to make sure that this is a project for the community. And with the bounty programs also allowing and enabling the community to contribute with rewards out there in addition to the great services that Envision provides from an open source development perspective. So please go vote on the spreadsheet. If you don't know or don't remember which ticket does what, there's no bad questions. Feel free to reach out to any of us here, or Giuseppe or Serge or Saharsh from the DA team. We're more than happy to answer them. I'm always happy to hop on a quick call and talk about this in the context of a specific use case. And this is really your project and your success. And so please feel free to get involved and ask questions and do what you need to do in terms of committing versus asking us to contribute. But your vote is ultimately the thing that really counts here.
Thank you, Wes. So just wanted to give you guys a quick format of the Excel sheet of which we would be sharing for the priority. So as you see that we have added all our worker topics, what we have gone through in the yesterday's and today's session. So just to make sure that column A to G is non-editable, because we just want to make sure that if you have any priorities, you need to add 3 columns, which is your name, your comments, and when you want that to be released, whether it is like within 3 months or within 6 months or whatever you would say. Just make sure that you add your company name or the stakeholder name, the comments, and this. If you already have commented or added priorities for the last 6 months roadmap, you can go ahead and please update that. If you think you have any change in the priority, feel free to please do that. Or if you are new to the sheet, please make sure that you add your columns at the end after this AH column. So if you have any questions or concerns on this sheet, please feel free to reach out to us so that we would be happy to help you guys and get your priorities before we finalize our Guardian roadmap. So we would be sharing this soon in our Slack channel, through our email as well, just to make sure that whoever missed it, they can look at our worker items, they can look at our recordings, which we will be sharing soon in our Slack channel in our community. Thank you so much for joining, guys. So as usual, we will be having our tech meets again following from next Wednesday, same time at 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Thank you and have a good day.